Welcome to the second episode of Dan Time. Hey, I'm your host, Dan McArdle. It is good to have you here. Nice to have you as a listener. You've got a lot to choose from. You've got your own top 3, top 5 favorite podcasts. But for right now, you're wedging us in, you're taking a shot, working Dan Time into your rotation. I appreciate it. Last week, Jim Powell kicked us off unexpectedly, but that was a blast. We talked a lot of nonsense, but hopefully it was worth your while. And this week we get to the Dans. Dan Weinrib, just a stand-up guy. I had the pleasure of working with him a little over 10 years ago in Birmingham, my last stop in Birmingham, Alabama. And he and I connected briefly, and we kept in touch. And it has been so nice to reconnect with him. Dan has been a public servant in Alabama for over 20 years. Way back in 2003, he ran an extremely close race for tax assessor for Jefferson County, and we get into that in this episode. You're going to love the story. A lot of cool details about Dan Weinrib. He is the Chief Records Officer, the city clerk for Trussville, Alabama. Trussville is about 20 minutes outside of Birmingham, and let me tell you, it is a hot spot. This particular city in the state is one of the fastest growing. Between 2010 and 2020, I believe they've experienced over 30% population growth, and worth a look, worth a visit. Great schools and a really cool entertainment district. But that's Dan's role, and you're going to love his background, his story. I'm so excited to bring it to you. Little information on Dan Time, and I'm going to check out of this. I'm not going to talk for 10 minutes, but if you'd like to reach the show, dantimepod@gmail.com is how you reach me. I'm also on X at dantimepod. We got the Facebook page and Instagram. Enjoy this episode with Dan Weinrib, and have a great week. Hey, Dan, so great to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's an honor to be your guest.
Well, you are the very first Dan out the gate, so nice distinction for you to have and to put on your wall of accolades, I guess.
Well, thanks. This will be a highlight for one of us, and hopefully not a low light for both of us. So, but thank you. It's an honor, and it's great to reconnect with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you on, and obviously we made our connection a little over a decade ago, and became good friends for a brief period. And I'm just really glad to be back in touch with you. You're another great example of not just a Dan, but a person that I think more people should know about, and especially in the role that you're currently in and your background. Dan Weinrib is the city clerk for Trussville in Jefferson County, and has just a rich background of public service. So hopefully, this episode will be informative for our listeners on just a brief overview of what a city clerk position entails, because maybe the average citizen doesn't know some of the ins and outs of that role and how you contribute to your community. So I guess just give us a brief rundown of what you do day to day in a nutshell.
That's a great question, Dan, and thanks for asking me to be your guest on your show. The city clerk in Alabama city governments they are basically the chief records officers for the towns or cities that they serve in. And in my role in Trussville, I'm responsible for keeping records, whether it's the minutes of city council meetings, the resolutions and ordinances they pass. There's also the Planning and Zoning Commission that decide or help or make recommendations on various matters like annexations, rezonings, subdivisions. And so I'm the recording secretary for them. I keep track of contracts and other city documents on behalf of the city. I'm the chief records officer. And so I'm responsible for the preservation, retention, and hopefully destruction of various records from time to time. Also, as city clerk, my office that is responsible by state law for the issuing of business licenses. And if that weren't enough, every 4 years when we have a municipal election, it's up to the city clerk to put on the city election for mayor and city council, much like what the Secretary of State does for the state of Alabama. That's what city clerks do for their respective cities. So it's a lot of project juggling. And in my role, I interface a lot with not just internally with other departments, but also with the public at large. So there's a lot of juggling going on.
And Dan, I would just take a guess that there's a lot of diplomacy or diplomatic skills that you've got to kind of have in your pocket to help different factions work together. And do you get to bring different types of people together? And if so, do you enjoy that part of your role?
Thankfully, I'm an extrovert. Otherwise, I would be absolutely miserable in this job. No, you have to. Communication and relationship skills are a must in order to be successful in this job. I mean, if you are great with writing and record keeping, but you dread dealing with people, the city clerk job can be a mismatch for anybody in the profession. Now, don't get me wrong, there are many introverts among my peers throughout the state. But definitely, you gotta love what you do, and you gotta love the community you work for and the people you serve. And so, yes, having those people skills are a must. And thankfully, I'm blessed with that. I'm trying to be modest here, but I really love interacting with the public as well as with my colleagues throughout city government.
Yeah, and don't ask me where I pulled this quote, but I really love it, and I think more people can hopefully take some inspiration here. I do what I love and love what I do. My smile on Monday mornings matches my smile on Friday afternoons.
Geez, that sounds like something I would say. Well, it's an absolute awesome blessing when you have a a job that you do. It doesn't feel like a job. There are times where I go to work and I think to myself, I can't believe they actually pay me to do this. No, but I also, by the same token, you and I come from the working world, and we've experienced jobs where we did not enjoy what we were doing, or maybe we enjoyed what we were doing, but we did not enjoy the place where we worked at. And that's when that happens. That's when your 9 to 5 may feel like a grind. But I've been lucky for the last 7 years since really October 2016 to find a job and employers that I absolutely have enjoyed hanging my hat at. So it's awesome.
Well, and you've had prior stops. I mean, your public service record goes back, let's just say 20 years. So before the city of Trussville, you were in the same role with the city of Tarrant. And I'm sure I don't have to just guess that you left that position in a better place than you found it and formed some great relationships that I'm sure you still carry to this day.
Correct. Correct. I was lucky. Before Tarrant, I had a 7 year hiatus from public service where I was back in the private sector. And then Tarrant, this is under Mayor Loxell Tuck, Mayor Tuck and the city council hired me to be their city clerk in October 2016. And at that time, their city clerk had to take medical retirement. She had a heart condition that was preventing her from being able to continue on with the job. When I came into office as city clerk over in Tarrant, there were a lot of files to go through and to reorganize an office that my predecessor, her health and stamina just didn't allow for her to be able to stay on top of the work like she had done before. And so there was some backlog cleanup to do. And on top of that, as city clerk over there, I had to quickly learn how to supervise municipal court magistrates, and I had never done magistrate work myself, and so I had to quickly immerse myself in the Alabama magistrate training so that I could learn how to be two employees supervisor on that side of the municipal court side of city government. And it was a very hard crash course, but it was a very enjoyable one. And what you find, Dan, is that in smaller cities like Tarrant and even smaller cities like that, the city clerk is juggling even more balls. They may, in a way, act like the city spokesperson responsible for social media. They may be responsible in other towns, at least not Tarrant, of running the city finances. Fortunately for me, there was an accountant on board who served as the chief finance officer, so I didn't have to do that. But anyway, but when I was over in Tarrant, I was in as many as 10 different lanes of management traffic. But I immersed myself in the job and loved it. And 4 years later, yes, I like to think I left the office in better shape than I found it. But when Trussville came a calling and offered me a job that I would have been an idiot to refuse, they are a bigger city with more resources, and they have their own, for instance, their own finance department, their own HR department. The mayor's assistant's responsible for social media, and municipal court is its own department. And so I went from 10 lanes of management traffic to about 3 or 4 lanes. And my work life is a bit more simpler, more concentrated now that I'm working for Trussville compared to Tarrant. And it's no knock on Tarrant, it's just that, as I said, Trussville gave me an offer that was too good to pass up.
I think that's a really good comparison where somebody listening that is at a certain point in their career that may be wearing, like you said, a lot of different hats, and they're thinking, yeah, I don't know why they don't have somebody designated for all these other roles that I seem to be filling day to day. But, the city clerk's role in Detroit is probably a lot, Detroit, Michigan, or St. Louis, Missouri is probably a little bit different than when you can drill down, to a hyper local area.
Correct, and that's why I often refer to our profession as we're jugglers, and the smaller the city, the more balls you have to juggle, and conversely, the larger the city, the fewer. So that's just how the nature of the beast. That's how it works.
Dan, I always like to jump off the train for a second when I have a thought. Do you, with your personality and your interest in obviously serving your community, but impacting those who just happen to be around you, maybe happen to be passing through that office for a period of time and they're working a role, they may not be there forever, but have you had people that you've been able to kind of light a fire underneath, and maybe because of your involvement in their life, they've kind of gotten more out of themselves than they were inclined to do? Is that something that you just generally enjoy doing if you see someone in the corner at a cubicle across the way that just looks like no one's really speaking to them? Do you like to reach out to those folks?
I'll leave it up to my coworkers to answer how much of a difference I may or may not have made on their work lives. But you know, I just my inclusive nature. I like to try to get to know as many people as possible wherever I go, wherever I work, and I like to think that I have done that. I do know that whether it was here in Trussville or in Tarrant or previously in Jefferson County in my public sector roles, that I tend to have developed great rapport with the folks I work with most frequently. And I remember going back to my Jefferson County days when I was a tax assessor, that there were some employees who, whether they were in the assessment section of property tax or in tax mapping, who did their jobs, did it well. And in my 6+ years there, I had an opportunity to promote a large number of them up one rung up the hierarchy ladder, and in some cases two. Something I'm proud of is that during my time as county tax assessor, over 60% of my promotions went to people from the minority demographics, more often than not African Americans, but also 2/3 of those promotions went to women. And talking about, opportunities and diversity in the workplace, I'd like to think that for some time made a difference in those folks' lives. Over in Tarrant and in Trussville, I've yet to have an opportunity to offer such promotions, just because such few, there aren't really any supervisory roles underneath the city clerk that I have experienced. I have had two hiring opportunities, and as far as positions, and one was in Tarrant, the other one here in Trussville. And I know that those folks certainly appreciate the opportunity I've given them to not only get the job, but train in the job. And, as their supervisor, I want them well trained. So whenever the state of Alabama or one of these government associations offers training, I make sure that they go.
Well, Dan, speaking of the Jefferson County tax assessor role from, wow, I'm sure you can't believe it's been 20 years ago.
No, I cannot.
Uh, this was we've talked about this briefly in the past, but that election cycle and that campaign was, you weren't destined for success. You probably weren't sure. I know you weren't sure until the 11th hour that you were even going to win the race.
Yes.
Dan, we could probably dedicate an entire episode, and maybe we need to do a part two, just to that time period in that race. But tell me about the early start of that campaign, and then just kind of run me up to election night, and then we'll for that.
Okay. Wow. And you're right. This could be a standalone conversation for another time, but I'll try to give you the background, the Reader's Digest version. When I first moved to the Birmingham community in 1996, I was doing political work for the Alabama Democratic Party. This was after I'd finished getting my master's degree in public administration at Alabama. And I worked for the Alabama Democratic Party back when there was a meaningful Alabama Democratic Party. And my focus at the time was on local elections, helping the state party win the hotly contested races, like the top 50 courthouse races across the state. And so I guess you can say that's where the seed was planted. Fast forward to 1999. I'm living in Birmingham. I'm in the private sector as an investments advisor, but I still have a hand in political activism. A local judge, Pete Johnson, the district judge on the criminal side, who knew me from the state party, came up to me and said, Dan, I've got a friend who is retiring. He's the longtime tax assessor. You'd be perfect for this job. You ought to consider running for it. And here he is, like 3 years before that election, and he's planting the seed in my head. And I tell him at the time, Pete, I'm going through a divorce right now. My mind is just not in the central time zone right now. He goes, I tell you what, get your divorce behind you, get things straightened out, and let's talk again next year. And it's like, okay, 2000. So we talked in 2000. He said, just follow the courthouse races, help some local candidates, see where you're at after the 2000 election. I said, yes, sir. And so I volunteered here and there for a couple of local candidates. Like at the time, Alan King was running for probate judge place 2, and there was David Lichtenstein, who was running for district judge for the first time. They both won their races in 2000. And once I went through the 2000 numbers, precinct returns, I realized after studying it, wow, 2002 can be a winnable race. And so I spent 2001 planning it, trying to develop what was going to be my shtick, what was going to be my theme for promoting, why Dan Weinrib and why for this particular little known courthouse office. And it also meant, dialing for dollars and leaning on really close friends and family for initial seed money. And then 2002 was when actually, at the end of 2001, November 2001, was when I made it known. I declared before the qualifying season even started. And then 2002 was when the election cycle got going. I qualified. It was at the same election cycle as the governor's race, which at the time was Siegelman running for re-election, and state legislatures, county commissioners races were going on. And at the end of the qualifying period in spring of 2002, I had no primary opposition. I had gotten my name out there among Democratic circles, which, considering I wasn't even from Birmingham, I'm born and raised in Montgomery. I'd only lived in Birmingham for, at that point, 5 to 6 years. That was something. And so I got to spend basically April through early November focused on the general election, where I knew I needed to get my name out all across the county, every nook and cranny possible. And yes, I had to, basically as a candidate, I learned quickly that your job as a candidate is to find money and find votes.
And Dan, in that cycle, so this is that political climate, you got to be walking into businesses or knocking on doors where going in there, did you think, hey, I'm walking into enemy territory, but I'm just going to try to shake some hands and see what kind of impression I can make?
Dan, that's a great question. Initially, I thought that, but when it came down to it, the tax assessor's office is not a policy making position. It's really just an administrative role. And what I found was that very few people had ever heard of the office or even heard of the incumbent who actually held the job. And so it wasn't a case of going into enemy territory. I was just going in and meeting people who needed to be aware that this is a position where their vote could make a difference, and they get to actually meet a candidate for this office for the first time. And so I saw it as just every day as an opportunity to sell myself to potential voters. Never felt like I was going to enemy territory. I was just going into unknown territory, and I get to make a good first impression on whoever I get a chance to meet.
That's a great point where you probably had the luxury of just talking about the role as opposed to, let's say, if you're running for House district or state senator, and then you really got to start talking about the Clinton administration or the boogeyman on whatever side, and then you just get lost and wrapped up in all that, and you don't really get to talk or educate that person about what you'd actually be doing for them.
Correct. And here, one of the things I did, Dan, was, I studied the office and looked at who does this office touch regularly that makes a difference in the work they do. And what first struck me was anyone who's tied to the real estate community, whether it's realtors, whether it's title companies, whether it's appraisers, folks like that. And so I made it a point to reach out through close friends to various members of the real estate community, realtors and such. And I lost track of how many times people said, Dan, this is the first time anyone has ever come to us and to introduce themselves. This is new for us. This is awesome. And I remembered that, and thankfully they remembered that too. So it worked to my advantage to be able to start making inroads with various parts of that business community.
At this time, I guess when you're in the campaign season, you were engaged or had recently married, and I just remember you telling me a funny story about election night. So obviously, the day of the election, you go cast your vote, and you really don't know. I mean, did you expect to win? Did you think, well, I feel good, but I'm just not sure? How did you feel? And then tell me about when the results came in.
We can look back on that night and laugh now. All right. Well, first of all, okay. Keep in mind the climate. You've got George W. Bush had been elected president in 2000. This is the midterm election, and Siegelman was in a dogfight of a re-election race, which he turned out he would narrowly lose. And we also knew that he was pouring a lot of get out the vote dollars into Jefferson County because he needed Jefferson County to turn out big for him to win. And that morning, election day, I wake up and it is raining, and it is raining heavy through the morning, and the clouds matched my mood. And I'm thinking to myself, oh no. It's because the rain's going to depress our turnout, and I was just fearing the worst. But then the rain broke by midday, and the sun started breaking out through the sky, and the rest of the day was going fine. I go to Glen Iris Elementary School. I was living in Southside Birmingham at the time. To cast my vote, I shake hands with my neighbors and thank them for working the polls. And during the day, my mood started to pick up, and I was checking in with the Siegelman campaign, and I was finding out that numbers were healthy, not quite as healthy as 1998, but they were still healthy enough that they were confident they could win the county comfortably. I'm thinking to myself, well, hopefully there's enough coattails there. And basically by 6 o'clock that night, while I opened up my house to my fiance and my friends to occupy my house and have the election night party, I hung out at the downtown courthouse to watch the returns come in. Nowadays, you can just go on the internet and just refresh your laptop to see what the precinct returns, what the county returns are saying. But, we didn't have that luxury quite yet in 2002. I'll always remember this. With about 65 or so percent of the precincts having already reported, the difference in number of votes between my Republican opponent and me, and there was a third party in the race, a Libertarian, the number of votes separating him and me was 4 votes. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, does Alabama have a recount law? How do we do recounts if the margin is this close? And anyway, the lead flipped again. This time I was ahead after some more boxes trickled in. And that night, it got down to like the final 10 boxes. I was ahead by a few thousand votes, call it maybe 4,000 to 5,000 votes. But I saw that the last 7 precincts had yet to report, and 6 of them were from Republican suburban areas. And I'm thinking to myself, uh-oh. And then, with each subsequent box that reported, I still had a lead, but it was narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And then it got to 1 box left. And I was up by 701 votes out of over 200,000 cast. Dan, I kid you not. And I'm thinking to myself, where is that last precinct? Where is it? And I forget who at the courthouse told me this, but it was from this area near Ross Bridge, but unincorporated Jefferson County, that where the number of voters for that total precinct was smaller than my lead. And that's when I could breathe a sigh of relief that I knew I was going to finish the night on top. And I figured if I was the happiest person in Jefferson County that I won, my future mother-in-law had to have been the second happiest.
Her son-in-law was going to be gainfully employed for at least the next 6 years.
And so I won the narrowest race in the county by 701 votes, and which comes down to like maybe 2 votes per precinct countywide. And I thought back to all 22,000 plus miles I put on my car, all those hands I shook, every effort that I made. And I can't put I cannot put my hand on any one thing that I did that made a difference in the race, but I knew that all the hard work that I did with help from friends and friends of friends to get me over the top, was a life learning experience I'll never forget. And it was, I still get chills thinking about that experience. It was very humbling and
just incredible.
It is incredible. And it was incredible because, for somebody who was not originally from the community to come in and 6 years later get elected countywide was amazing. And I'll always remember that night as my parents left to go home. My mom said, Danny, I'm always Danny to her. She said, Danny, I want you to remember this. I want you to remember all the people who were your friends long before you became a political candidate. Then you need to remember all the people who became your friends during the campaign and helped you get to this point. And then remember all the people who suddenly become your friends after tonight. Make sure you always remember that, the difference. And, that it really is true. There's certain people in your life who will stay with you throughout, and there are other people who will be in your life temporarily, and then there are people who will come in and, well, they'll pretend to be your friend. And that's just the nature of life, as well as, politics magnified.
Yep. As they say, everybody loves a winner. So it's real easy to get on board with a winner and say, yeah, that's my guy, or to hang around that person. But what great advice from your mom.
Well, look, it's no surprise. I mean, I grew up in Montgomery, where government is part of, it's central to life down there. And, I remember going with my mom as a kid to City Hall or to state government whenever she had to lobby on certain issues. And, something that she impressed upon us boys, I'm the youngest of three boys, was, everybody who's in elected office works for you. And so you deserve to know, what they are doing on your behalf and how they are conducting the public business, because this affects you and me. And so fast forward from that early childhood lesson to when I took office in January of 2003, and I show up at the courthouse and I see my name over the front door of the tax assessor's office. And I'm thinking, wow, that looks cool. And then there goes my mother's timeless advice. And that's when I remembered, now I'm being watched. And so, once again, another humbling moment, but still, it's another timeless lesson for anybody who wants to get into public services. Remember what you're doing, you're being monitored, and so conduct yourself accordingly.
That's great stuff, Dan. We've talked a lot about your career and your past experience. Dan, just from me to you, thank you for your years of public service. I haven't lived in Jefferson County in over 10 years, but I appreciate what you do. I think oftentimes on a municipal level, a lot of the hard work that goes on behind closed doors, just the average person going about their day doesn't realize that there are people working very hard to make a difference in their communities in roles like yours. But then again, there are a lot of people who do know what you do, and the people who know you, I hope I'm not getting too gushy here, Dan, but to know Dan Weinrib is probably to love Dan Weinrib.
You give me too much credit, but I'll take it anyway. But hey, look, no, Dan, look, I appreciate folks like you who understand and appreciate the work that the behind the scenes public servants do, because we're here to make a difference, and more often than not get in front of the cameras and not do it for notoriety, but we're just doing it just to get the job done and move our communities forward. And anything we can do to help the cause is what stirs us. That's what motivates us. So as we alluded to earlier in the conversation, when you do what you love and you love what you do, it never feels like work.
Well, Dan, if you will come back to do a part 2, I'm going to tease something here. Because I want to do a baseball episode with you, or that's primarily all we talk about. So if you're up for it, we'll schedule it.
Twist my arm. No. As much as I love public service, baseball has had my heart far longer than public service ever had. And I'm happy to talk about baseball, my relationship with baseball. And
I understand that you've been a high school baseball umpire. You attended the Harry Wendelstedt School of Umpiring, if I'm saying that correctly.
Correct.
And also people that, if you're not familiar with Rickwood Field, you probably will be familiar with Rickwood Field, I think, next season when they do the Classic with 2 MLB teams.
Correct. The Rickwood Classic is coming back to Rickwood Field after a few years' absence. The Birmingham Barons are playing the Montgomery Biscuits, I want to say at or around June 18th. And then 2 days later, we have San Francisco Giants and the St. Louis Cardinals playing a regular season game at Rickwood Field.
Oh, that's right. It's the Field of Dreams game.
Correct.
Wow. And you've been involved with, is it Friends of Rickwood?
Friends of Rickwood started in 1996, and my involvement with Friends of Rickwood started as a scoreboard volunteer. I want to say around 2004 or 2005, and I've been on the Friends of Rickwood board since I want to say either '06 or '07, something like that. So, yeah, I've been involved with Rickwood for 20 years, pretty much.
Okay, Dan, I want to move to just some wacky rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
Okay, name a movie that makes you either cry or well up, and it does not have to be a chick flick. It doesn't have to be an automatic tearjerker. What's a movie that you watch it and you're like, man, that just gets me every time?
For the love of the game.
Wonderful, wonderful. When you sit down at a Mexican restaurant, are you getting a usual plate? Are you getting tacos? Are you getting burritos, enchiladas? Or do you sometimes go to a Mexican restaurant that has an expansive menu and you're like, well, shoot, I need to go. I need to try this. I need to go with this specialty. Do you have a go-to? And if Mexican's not one of your,
that's a fair question. And I love Mex-Tex food. I try to branch out and get a different dish. But my standby is if my wife is with me, I'll order a margarita so that she can drive.
When you go to the store, when you go to Walmart or Publix or wherever you shop for just stuff, are you one of those drivers or shoppers that you're going to hunt for the absolute closest open space, or do you just say, you know what, I'm going to shoot to the back, I'm going to get a spot, and I'll be in the store here in a few minutes?
No, I have a plan of attack, and it starts with my wife's grocery list, which she groups things in sequence, and so that I can get through the grocery store and out of there as quickly as possible.
I got to ask you another question. I don't know if you're a rock and roll music fan, but between these two songs, which one would you rather hear 2 times in a row? Huey Lewis, Heart of Rock and Roll, or Bob Seger, Old Time Rock and Roll?
Bob
or
Seger.
Neither. And along those lines, do you have a favorite artist, or do you have somebody that's in the top 3 that just after a long week or a great day that you're like, oh, I got to hear that song?
It depends on the kind of week, but I would say my default music choice are classic blues. So we're talking Muddy Waters, we're talking B.B. King, Coco Taylor.
These are some great names.
Folks like that. That's my default music when I leave work.
Dan, have you ever not prepared well enough for a rainy day and shot out the house without an umbrella, without proper shoes, and just gotten soaked before you get to the office?
Last week, I got drenched. My mid-afternoon walk, I left the office ill-prepared and got drenched on my return to City Hall. And let's just say that my coworkers laughed at my expense, and I deserved it.
Well, Dan, we're just about out of time here, but I would love to have you back for a second episode. Is that a deal?
That's a sure thing. That's a deal.
Okay. Well, Dan Weinrib, it has been a pleasure. Folks, I hope you got something out of this episode. Remember, when you leave the house in the morning, make a sweep. Make a quick sweep. Do not leave that exhaust fan on in the guest bathroom. Turn all your lights off. Turn the AC. Don't turn the AC off. Do not turn it off. Put it on an appropriate temperature for the day. You'll be happy that you did. Okay, guys, have a great week. And Dan Time is out. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Dan.